The Arizona Military Air Base buzzed with anticipation as executives and engineers gathered around a $3 billion fighter jet prototype, their eyes fixed on the sleek machine that represented the future of American air dominance. But nobody noticed the older black man in faded coveralls sweeping the hangar floor, and when he quietly mentioned something about the aircraft, young recruits laughed and mocked him as just a confused janitor pretending to understand technology beyond his comprehension. But Ezekiel Harris only smiled and said 5 simple words that would change everything within 24 hours. Because what none of them knew was that this forgotten man in worn boots had secrets buried in classified files. And when disaster struck at 12,000 feet with a pilot's life on the line, they would all discover the terrible cost of underestimating someone who used to build these machines. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The Arizona sun hammered down on the tarmac like molten copper, turning the military air base into a shimmering maze of heat waves and polished metal. Crowds gathered in clusters around the sleek fighter jets displayed across the expo grounds, their phones raised high, capturing every angle of the billion-dollar machines that represented the cutting edge of American aerospace engineering. Families pointed and gasped. Young recruits stood at attention in their crisp uniforms. Corporate executives in expensive suits exchanged handshakes beneath white canopy tents while champagne glasses clinked in celebration of technological dominance. Amid all this spectacle, nobody noticed the old man sweeping the hangar floor. Ezekiel Harris moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that invisibility was sometimes a mercy. At 58, his body carried the weight of decades lived hard. His shoulders were broad but slightly stooped, his hands scarred and calloused from a lifetime of working with metal and machinery. He wore faded blue coveralls that had seen better years, the fabric worn thin at the knees and elbows. His work boots were scuffed and cracked, held together more by habit than leather. A janitor's badge hung from a frayed lanyard around his neck, the plastic yellowed and scratched. But his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, alert, the kind of eyes that saw past surfaces into the mechanics of things. When he paused his sweeping to look up at the fighter jets gleaming in their display positions, something flickered across his face. Recognition, memory, perhaps even longing. "Hey, check out the old guy," a voice called out, young and cocky. "Thinks he knows what he's looking at." 3 recruits stood near the entrance to Hangar B, their uniforms still stiff with newness. The one who had spoken was maybe 22, with the kind of confidence that came from textbooks and simulators, but no real experience. His name tag read Dawson. His friends laughed along with him, their eyes following Zeke as he continued his slow circuit around the hangar's perimeter. Zeke didn't look up. He had heard variations of this his entire life. The jokes, the dismissals, the casual cruelty of being underestimated. "Bet he thinks those are lawn mowers," another recruit added, nudging Dawson in the ribs. Zeke pushed his broom toward them, his movements unhurried. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even, touched with a hint of a southern accent that years in the desert had never quite erased. "Son, I used to build these." The words hung in the air for exactly 2 seconds before all 3 recruits burst into laughter. Dawson doubled over, slapping his knee like it was the funniest thing he had heard all year. "Sure you did, Pops," Dawson managed between gasps. "And I'm secretly an astronaut." "Come on, leave the old man alone," the 3rd recruit said, though he was still grinning. "He's probably just confused." They walked off toward the demo area, their laughter fading into the general noise of the crowd. Zeke watched them go, his expression unchanged. He had learned not to argue. The truth had a way of revealing itself when it mattered, or sometimes it didn't. Either way, he had stopped caring what people believed about him. He returned to his sweeping, the bristles scratching against concrete that was already clean. But the work gave him a reason to be here, close to the machines that had once been his entire world. Across the hangar, a woman in a white blouse and dark slacks stood reviewing a tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. Dr. Evelyn Moore was 43 and had spent the last 15 years clawing her way up through a male-dominated field to become the lead civilian engineer on this project. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore no jewelry except for a simple watch. She had the efficient air of someone who solved problems for a living and had no patience for the politics that came with them. Behind her, a man in an immaculate dress uniform strode through the hangar like he owned not just the building, but the very air inside it. Colonel Richard Payne was 51, with silver-touched hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and practiced authority. His chest displayed rows of commendations, though anyone who had served with him knew most had been earned behind desks, not in combat. He lived for moments like this, when cameras were everywhere and his name would be attached to success. "Evelyn," he called out, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Status update. I want everything perfect for tomorrow's demonstration." She looked up from her tablet, suppressing a sigh. "The systems check came back clean, Colonel. The Ares Falcon is performing within expected parameters." "Within expected?" Payne's eyebrows rose. "I need exceptional, Doctor. We have international buyers flying in. Defense contractors. This prototype represents $3.2 billion in development funding, and if we don't secure the next round of investment, this entire program dies." "I understand the stakes," Evelyn said, her tone carefully neutral. "The aircraft is ready." Payne's gaze swept the hangar, cataloging every detail, every potential flaw. His eyes passed over Zeke without a flicker of recognition, as if the janitor were simply part of the furniture. Then he strode away toward the press area, already rehearsing his talking points. Evelyn turned back to her tablet, but something made her glance up. The janitor was standing near the Ares Falcon now, his broom resting against the wall. He had removed a flickering light panel from an inspection station and was replacing it with a fresh bulb he must have retrieved from his cart. It was work that nobody had asked him to do, a small detail that most would have ignored. She watched as he tested the new bulb, nodded with satisfaction, and carefully reattached the panel. There was a precision to his movements that seemed at odds with his position. When he picked up his broom again, he finally noticed her watching. Their eyes met for just a moment. He gave a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between people who understood what it meant to do a job right simply because it mattered. Evelyn nodded back, then returned her attention to the data streaming across her screen. But something about that brief exchange stayed with her, a sense that she had just witnessed something more than routine maintenance. The afternoon wore on. The crowd swelled and then thinned as the expo hours came to a close. Executives and engineers filtered out in groups, heading to hotels and celebration dinners. The recruits were dismissed. Security lights flickered on as the desert sky deepened from blue to purple to black. Zeke remained. He moved through the emptying hangar with the same patient rhythm, collecting discarded programs and straightening chairs that visitors had left askew. But eventually, he found himself alone with the one thing that had drawn him here in the first place. The Ares Falcon. It stood in the center of the hangar under dramatic spotlight, a predator frozen mid-strike. The aircraft was all deadly curves and sharp angles, painted in matte gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its cockpit canopy gleamed like a dark eye. Weapons pods hung beneath its wings, empty for the demonstration, but still menacing. Every line of the jet spoke of speed, power, and lethality refined to its purest form. Zeke approached it slowly, the way a man might approach something holy. He set down his broom and reached out, his scarred fingers touching the cool metal of the fuselage. The contact sent a shock of memory through him, so powerful he had to close his eyes. His lips moved, barely audible. Auxiliary fuel line, Section 4. Hydraulic pressure valve, Mark 7. Combustion chamber alignment, 0.3 degrees tolerance. The codes and part numbers came back to him like a prayer learned in childhood. His hands moved along the surface, tracing seams and access panels with the familiarity of a man who had once known every bolt and wire of machines like this. "I used to build these," he whispered again, but this time there was no one to laugh. The hangar was silent except for the low hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of a truck engine somewhere outside. Zeke leaned his forehead against the jet's side, and for just a moment, he let himself remember. The memory hit him like a hammer. A sound, the sharp metallic clang of a tool hitting concrete. In the empty hangar, the echo was enough to rip a hole in time, dragging him backward through the years. Suddenly, he wasn't in Arizona anymore. He was back in the desert, the real desert, where the sand was stained dark and the sky was choked with smoke. The sound became a different sound, an explosion close enough to knock him off his feet. Heat and pressure and the screaming of damaged engines filled his ears. He was 20 years younger, wearing combat fatigues covered in grease and blood. A fighter jet lay crippled on its side, one wing crumpled, fuel leaking into the sand. His team worked frantically around him, hands moving with desperate speed. "Harris, we need to evac," someone shouted. His commanding officer, face streaked with dirt and fear. "Leave it. That's an order." The pilot's still breathing, Zeke heard himself say, his younger voice steady despite the chaos. "Give me 3 minutes." "We don't have 3 minutes. They're coming back." But Zeke was already elbow-deep in the damaged turbine housing, rerouting fuel lines with one hand while bracing the unstable engine mount with his shoulder. His team surrounded him, laying down, covering fire as tracer rounds lit up the evening sky. Someone screamed. He couldn't look, couldn't stop working. The pilot's life depended on these next few seconds. He got the engine stabilized, pulled the pilot free, dragged him toward the evacuation helicopter that was already spinning up, blades chopping the air into submission. Then the second explosion. Bigger, closer. The world went white. When he came to, he was alone. The helicopter was gone. His team was gone. He could hear enemy vehicles in the distance, getting closer. His radio was dead. His leg was bleeding. And the fighter jet he had just saved was a twisted pile of smoking wreckage that would never fly again. In the Arizona hangar, Zeke's hand trembled against the Ares Falcon's fuselage. He pulled it back, staring at his own fingers as if they belonged to someone else. Slowly, he curled them into a fist, squeezing until the trembling stopped. "Steady," he told himself, the same word he had repeated 1,000 times in 1,000 bad situations. "Steady." He took a deep breath, picked up his broom, resumed sweeping. But as he worked, he heard something that made him pause. A sound so faint that most people would have missed it entirely. A mechanical whine, high-pitched and irregular, coming from deep within the Ares Falcon's left engine housing. Zeke's head snapped up. He knew that sound, had heard it before in a dozen different birds going bad. The pitch was wrong, unbalanced. It was the sound of something misaligned, something that would seem fine on the ground but would tear itself apart under the stress of flight. He stood perfectly still, listening with the focused intensity of a man whose life had once depended on catching sounds like this before they became catastrophes. The whine cycled, stuttered, then went silent. The system had shut itself down automatically. Good. That meant the safeties were working. But it also meant that when they tried to fire up this bird tomorrow for the big demonstration, something was going to fail. And nobody else seemed to have noticed. Zeke looked toward the hangar exit, where the last security guard was making his rounds. He looked back at the fighter jet, its silhouette sharp against the overhead lights. He picked up his broom and walked away. It wasn't his problem anymore. He was just the janitor. Nobody wanted his help. Nobody would believe him even if he offered it. But as he pushed his cart toward the storage room, one thought echoed in his mind with the persistence of that failing engine. Tomorrow was going to be a disaster, and he was the only one who knew it. The Arizona morning arrived with the same brutal sunshine that had baked the airbase the day before, but today the heat carried a different quality. Anticipation hung in the air like humidity thick enough to taste. By 7 in the morning, the parking lots were already filling with vehicles, news vans positioning themselves for the best angles, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Inside Hangar B, controlled chaos reigned. The demonstration was scheduled for 10 sharp, and nothing about the morning was going according to plan. "I need a status update now." Colonel Payne barked, his usually immaculate uniform already showing dark patches of sweat under the arms. The investors arrive in 90 minutes, and I will not have them watching a grounded aircraft. 3 technicians hunched over a diagnostic console connected to the Ares Falcon's main systems. Numbers scrolled across screens in rapid succession, each readout triggering furrowed brows and whispered conversations. The lead technician, a thin man named Morrison, shook his head slowly. "Sir, the left engine is refusing to cycle through ignition sequence. The diagnostics keep coming back clean, but the physical test is failing." "Then the diagnostics are wrong," Payne snapped. "Run them again." "Sir, we've run them 4 times. The software says everything is operational, but when we attempt to prime the ignition, we get nothing. It's like the engine knows something we don't." Evelyn Moore pushed through the growing crowd of engineers and military personnel, her tablet clutched to her chest. She had been up since 4 in the morning, running her own checks from the remote monitoring station. The numbers she was seeing made no sense. Everything should be working, but Morrison was right. The engine was dead. "Colonel, I need to speak with you," she said, trying to project calm authority despite the knot forming in her stomach. Payne spun on her. "Unless you're about to tell me that jet is ready to fly, I don't want to hear it. I received a call from the investment group an hour ago. They're concerned about the cost overruns from the previous quarter. If this demonstration doesn't go flawlessly, they're threatening to pull their backing." The color drained from Payne's face, then rushed back twice as red. "That's not happening. We will make this work. Morrison, get Kyle in here. Now." Kyle Benton arrived minutes later, moving with the swagger of someone who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with enough confidence. At 29, he was the youngest senior technician on the base, a position he had earned through a combination of genuine skill and an aggressive ability to take credit for other people's work. His hair was styled with too much product, and his uniform was always just slightly too tight, emphasizing the hours he spent in the base gym. "Colonel," he said with a nod that was technically respectful, but somehow managed to convey that he considered himself an equal. "I heard we have a situation. The left engine won't ignite." "Fix it." Kyle cracked his knuckles, a gesture that made Evelyn want to roll her eyes. "No problem. Probably just a sensor calibration issue. These new systems are sensitive. I'll have it running in 20 minutes. He moved toward the aircraft with the bearing of a man who expected applause. Behind him, the morning crew stepped aside, some with relief, others with skepticism. Kyle had a reputation for making bold promises. Whether he delivered on them was a different question. Near the back of the hangar, Zeke pushed a cleaning cart loaded with trash bags and supplies. He had arrived for his shift at 6, the way he did every morning, and had immediately sensed the tension in the air, the increased security, the frantic energy of the technical teams, the barely contained panic radiating from Colonel Payne. Something had gone wrong with the bird. The same bird he had heard struggling last night. He positioned himself near a tool station, ostensibly organizing cleaning supplies, but his attention was fixed on the cluster of people surrounding the Ares Falcon. He watched Kyle climb up to the engine access panel, watched him pull out a diagnostic scanner and start running tests with exaggerated precision. Zeke's eyes narrowed. He could tell from Kyle's body language that the younger man was guessing, throwing solutions at the problem and hoping something would stick. That wasn't how you diagnosed a fighter jet. That was how you made things worse. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Kyle climbed down for the aircraft, his confidence visibly diminished. "The auxiliary fuel line pressure is reading normal, but I'm going to manually prime the system," he announced. "That should force the ignition cycle to reset." Evelyn stepped forward. "Kyle, that's not recommended according to the safety protocols. If there's an obstruction in the line, you could cause a—" "I know what I'm doing, Doctor," Kyle interrupted, his tone sharp. "I've been working on these systems for 3 years. Then you should know better than to bypass the automated safeties." Kyle ignored her. He grabbed a pneumatic pressure tool from the kit and began connecting it to the fuel line access port. Around him, the other technicians exchanged worried glances but said nothing. Nobody wanted to be the one to challenge Kyle in front of the colonel. Zeke watched from 30 feet away. His hands gripped the edge of his cleaning cart so tightly his knuckles went pale. He saw Kyle attach the pressure line, saw him adjust the regulator without checking the gauge. saw him prepare to pump high-pressure fuel into a system that was already overstressed. "Don't," Zeke said, his voice low. Nobody heard him. Or if they did, they ignored him. Kyle squeezed the trigger on the pressure tool. There was a hiss of compressed air, a surge of fuel through the line, and then a sharp crack. A spray of sparks erupted from the fuel port connection, bright orange against the dim hangar lighting. Kyle jerked backward as flames licked up from the engine housing, small but rapidly growing. Someone screamed. The fire alarm began its piercing wail. Zeke didn't think. His body moved on instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 2 combat tours and 100 dangerous situations. He dropped his cart and sprinted toward the aircraft faster than anyone would have thought possible for a man his age. He grabbed Kyle by the back of his uniform and hauled him away from the engine just as a secondary explosion belched smoke and flame from the access panel. They hit the ground hard, Zeke covering the younger man's body with his own as heat washed over them. Fire suppression systems activated with a whoosh, foam cascading down from ceiling nozzles, smothering the flames in thick white chemical blanket. For several seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the alarm and the hiss of the suppression system. Then Zeke rolled off Kyle and climbed to his feet, breathing hard. His coveralls were singed at the shoulder. Kyle lay on the concrete, staring up at the ceiling in shock, his face pale. Evelyn ran to them. "Are you hurt? Kyle, can you hear me?" Kyle nodded slowly, his swagger completely deflated. What happened?" "You nearly blew yourself up," Evelyn said flatly. "That's what happened." Colonel Payne approached, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. But his anger died as he took in the scene. The scorched engine housing, the foam-covered floor, the way his entire program had nearly ended in an explosion caught on every security camera in the hangar. He looked at Zeke, really looked at him, for perhaps the first time. You pulled him out." "Yes, sir," Zeke said simply. "How did you know to?" "I heard it." Zeke interrupted, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Last night, the imbalance in the turbine seals. When you flood a compromised seal with high-pressure fuel, this is what happens." He gestured at the damaged engine. "You're lucky the main fuel reservoir didn't catch. If that had gone up, we'd be burying people instead of cleaning up foam." The hangar had gone completely silent. Every technician, every engineer, every officer was staring at this janitor who had just delivered a technical assessment that most of them couldn't follow. Kyle climbed to his feet, his pride wounded worse than his body. "How the hell would you know about turbine seals?" Zeke met his gaze calmly. "Because I used to build these, son. Built them, flew them, and fixed them when they got shot to pieces. That imbalance you missed? It'll kill the engine mid-flight. Probably around 12,000 feet, when the pressure differential hits maximum load. The pilot won't even have time to eject." "That's impossible," Kyle shot back, but his voice lacked conviction. "The diagnostics would have caught." "Your diagnostics are checking software parameters," Zeke said, his tone patient, like he was explaining something to a child. "They're not listening to what the machine is telling you. That whine in the left engine? That's a misaligned combustion chamber putting uneven pressure on the seal assembly. You can't see it on a computer screen. You have to hear it. Feel it." Colonel Payne's face had gone through several colors and settled on a deep red. "This is absurd. You expect me to believe that our janitor knows more about our $3 billion prototype than our entire engineering team?" "I don't expect you to believe anything, sir," Zeke said quietly. "But I do know that if you try to fly that bird tomorrow without fixing the real problem, someone's going to die." The colonel took a step towards Zeke, his body language aggressive. "Your facility staff, not certified, not qualified, and definitely not authorized to be giving technical assessments of classified military equipment." Evelyn moved between them. "Colonel, with respect, he just saved Kyle's life. Maybe we should listen to what he has to say." "Dr. Moore, you're already on thin ice for defending this. Payne gestured at Zeke with barely contained contempt. "This person has no business even touching the aircraft, let alone making wild claims about its operational status." "He was right about the fuel system," Evelyn pressed. "He was right about what would happen if Kyle forced the pressure sequence. Maybe he's right about the turbine, too. He got lucky, Payne said flatly. And this conversation is over. Security, escort Mr. Harris to his supervisory office. He is not to return to this hangar without explicit authorization. Two security guards approached, not roughly, but with clear intent. Zeke didn't resist. He simply nodded and allowed himself to be led away, his face betraying nothing. As he passed Evelyn, he caught her eye for just a moment. "Run your test if you want," he said softly. "But when that seal blows, remember we had this conversation." Then he was gone, shuffled out through a side door while the cleanup crews moved in to assess the damage to the Ares Falcon. Kyle stood alone in the middle of the hangar, staring at the scorch marks on the concrete where he had nearly died. His hands were shaking. Around him, the other technicians were already back at work, but he could feel their sidelong glances. The judgment. Morrison approached carefully. "You okay, man?" "How did he know?" Kyle whispered. "How did that old man know exactly what would happen?" Morrison shrugged. "Maybe he really did work on these things once. Before our time. Or maybe he's just some homeless guy who reads too many tech manuals," Kyle said, but his voice lacked conviction. Across the hangar, Evelyn stood with her tablet forgotten in her hands, her mind racing. Something about Ezekiel Harris didn't add up. The way he moved, the precision of his technical language, the absolute certainty in his warning. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to the base personnel office. "Need complete file on Ezekiel Harris, custodial staff." "Urgent." Colonel Payne's voice cut through her thoughts. "Dr. Moore, we have 7 hours until the demonstration and a damaged engine housing. Tell me you have a solution." Evelyn looked at the Ares Falcon, its left side still dripping with fire suppressant foam, and felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach. The investors were coming. The press was already setting up, and she had a very bad feeling that the old janitor's warning was going to prove prophetic. "I'm working on it, sir," she said. But for the first time in her career, she had no idea if that would be enough. Outside in the bright Arizona morning, Zeke walked between the two security guards toward the administrative building. His shoulder ached where it had hit the concrete. His lungs still tasted like chemical fire suppressant, but his mind was clear. He had tried to warn them. They hadn't listened. Some people had to learn the hard way. He just hoped that when they did, nobody would pay the price with their life. The fire suppressant foam had been cleaned away, and the damaged engine housing had been temporarily patched, but the tension inside Hangar B remained thick as smoke. Evelyn sat in her office long after most of the day crew had gone home, the only light coming from her computer monitor and the desk lamp that cast sharp shadows across the scattered papers covering her workspace. The personnel file had arrived to her inbox an hour ago. She had been staring at it ever since, afraid to open it, and equally afraid not to. Finally, she clicked. The first page was routine. Employment records showing Ezekiel Harris had been hired as custodial staff 14 months ago. Previous address, none listed. Emergency contact, none. The sparse details painted the picture of a man who had slipped through the cracks of society, invisible and forgotten. But then she found the attachment marked military service record, classified access required. Her security clearance was high enough. She entered her credentials and waited as the file loaded. What appeared on her screen made her breath catch. Staff Sergeant Ezekiel Harris, United States Air Force, Mechanical Division, Special Operations Support, 22 years of service. Commendations for aircraft recovery under hostile conditions. Expert designation in fighter jet propulsion systems, hydraulics, and emergency field repair. 3 tours overseas. And then, abruptly, medical discharge with honors. But it was the incident report attached to his discharge that made Evelyn lean forward, her eyes scanning the heavily redacted text. The language was careful, bureaucratic, designed to obscure as much as it revealed. An operation in an undisclosed Middle Eastern location. A fighter jet down behind enemy lines. Harris and his team deployed to recover the aircraft and extract the pilot. The mission had gone wrong. Casualties sustained. Harris himself injured, but successful in securing the pilot's evacuation. Then came the phrase that made everything clear. to protect operational security and maintain plausible deniability regarding unauthorized airspace violations. SSGT Harris was offered early medical retirement with full benefits and non-disclosure agreement. Evelyn sat back in her chair, the pieces falling into place. They had sent Zeke and his team into a situation that wasn't supposed to exist, and when things went sideways, they had quietly erased him from the record, gave him a medical discharge and a pension, and hoped he would disappear. Apparently, he had, right into homelessness and a janitor's position where nobody would ever think to ask about his past. She printed the file, then deleted her access log. Some things were better kept off the official record. The desert night had settled over the base by the time Evelyn found Zeke. He was outside the perimeter fence, in a small patch of scrubland where the security lights didn't quite reach. He had spread out a thin sleeping bag on the ground next to a battered duffel bag that seemed to contain everything he owned. A small camping stove boiled water for instant coffee. He looked up as she approached, unsurprised. "Dr. Moore, you're working late." "So are you," she said, then corrected herself. "Or maybe you're not working at all anymore. I heard the colonel suspended you pending review." "Pending never showing up again is more like it," Zeke said without bitterness. "It's fine. I've been fired from worse places." Evelyn sat down on a nearby rock, uninvited but not unwelcome. For a moment, they both stared out at the desert, where the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "You didn't just build them," she said quietly. "You saved them. Saved the pilots flying them. Under enemy fire." Zeke's hand stilled on the coffee cup he was holding. "You read my file. What wasn't redacted, yes. Then you know I also got people killed. My team. Good people who trusted me to keep them safe while I focused on a machine." His voice remained level, but Evelyn could hear the weight behind the words. "I chose the jet over them. Made the calculation that saving one pilot was worth risking 5 technicians. Turned out I was wrong. The file said you completed the mission. The pilots survived. 3 of my team didn't." Zeke took a sip of coffee, his eyes distant. "The military gave me a medal and a discharge and told me never to talk about what happened. They were worried about the political fallout if anyone found out we had been operating in restricted airspace. Easier to pay me off and make me disappear." Evelyn pulled out the printed file. "According to this, you were one of the best aircraft mechanics in the entire Air Force. You had commendations from generals. Why didn't you fight the discharge?" "Because they were right, ma'am. My job was to protect my team, and I failed. Didn't matter that the mission succeeded. 3 families got folded flags because I thought I could fix a jet faster than the enemy could find us." He set down his coffee cup carefully. "After that, I didn't see much point in fixing things anymore. Seemed like everything I touched ended up broken anyway. But you came back," Evelyn said. "You took a job on a military base, working around the very aircraft that haunt me." Zeke finished. "Yeah, turns out you can't run from yourself. Tried for a few years. Drank too much, moved too much, ended up on the streets. Then I figured maybe the only way to make peace with what happened was to stay close to it. So when this job opened up, I took it. Thought maybe I could do some good, even if it was just keeping the floors clean around birds that people smarter than me were building." "You're smarter than any of them," Evelyn said. "You proved that today." Zeke shook his head. "Being smart doesn't mean much if nobody's listening. And why should they? I'm just the janitor, a homeless vet who probably has PTSD and tells stories about the good old days. I know what I look like to people like the colonel." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father was Air Force too. Helicopter mechanic. Served in Vietnam. When he came back, they treated him like he was broken. Like his service had been a failure instead of a sacrifice. He couldn't hold down a job. The VA kept losing his paperwork. He died when I was 16, still waiting for disability benefits that never came." "I'm sorry," Zeke said softly. "That's why I became an engineer. I thought if I could understand the machines, maybe I could understand what he went through, what he gave up." She met his eyes. "And that's why I'm not going to let them do to you what they did to him. You tried to help today, and they threw you out. But that jet is still broken, and tomorrow they're going to put a pilot in it. And unless someone fixes it the right way, you were right. Someone's going to die. They won't let me near it," Zeke said. "The colonel made that clear. Then we don't tell him. Evelyn leaned forward. I have access to the hangar after hours. Officially, I'll be running overnight diagnostics. Unofficially, you'll be with me, showing me exactly what's wrong and how to fix it. Zeke studied her face, searching for doubt or deception and finding neither. Dr. Moore, if they catch you bringing me into a restricted area, they'll court-martial you. You'll lose your clearance, your job, everything you've worked for. My father used to say that the only thing worth losing everything for is doing the right thing, Evelyn replied. That jet has a flaw that your diagnostics can't see. But you can hear it, feel it. And if I have to risk my career to keep someone from dying in a preventable crash, then that's what I'm going to do. She stood up, brushing dust from her slacks. I'm going back to the hangar in 1 hour for mandatory system checks. The security guard on duty tonight is Tom Whitmore. He's a good man. Doesn't ask too many questions. If you happen to show up with me, claiming you need to do some cleaning maintenance, I don't think he'll object. And if something goes wrong, Zeke asked, if I make it worse, then at least we tried. But I don't think you will. I think you know exactly what that jet needs. She started walking back toward the base, then paused and looked over her shoulder. 1 hour, Zeke. Don't make me do this alone. He watched her disappear into the darkness, her footsteps crunching on gravel. Then he looked down at his hands, scarred and steady, and thought about the choice she was offering him. The chance to do what he did best, one more time. The chance at redemption, or at least its shadow. He poured out the rest of his coffee and started packing his things. The hangar was a different world at night. The overhead lights had been dimmed to emergency levels, casting everything in shades of gray and shadow. The Ares Falcon sat alone in the center of the space, silent and waiting, its sleek form looking somehow more dangerous without the crowds and cameras. Evelyn and Zeke entered through the side access door just after midnight. True to her prediction, Tom Whitmore had waved them through with barely a second glance, accepting Evelyn's explanation about overnight maintenance without question. Now they stood beneath the fighter jet, and Zeke felt the familiar pull of purpose settling over him like an old coat. Show me, Evelyn said simply. Zeke circled the aircraft slowly, his eyes tracking every line and panel. He stopped at the left engine housing, the one that had nearly exploded earlier, and placed his palm flat against the metal. It was cool now, all the heat from the day's disaster long since dissipated. Hand me that stethoscope, he said, pointing to a diagnostic kit on a nearby table. Evelyn retrieved it, a specialized mechanic stethoscope designed for listening to internal machinery. Zeke placed the sensor against 3 different points on the engine casing, his eyes closed, his entire focus narrowed to the sounds only he could hear. There, he said finally. You hear that? Evelyn leaned close, listening. She heard nothing but the ambient hum of the hangar systems. I don't. It's not running, Zeke said. But the metal remembers. There's a stress pattern in the housing. The vibration signature is wrong. He moved the stethoscope 6 inches to the left. Here, this is where the combustion chamber sits. And here, he tapped the casing lightly. This is where the mounting bolts connect to the turbine shaft. He pulled out a small LED flashlight from his pocket and clicked it on, directing the beam into the narrow access gap. The mounting bolts were over-torqued during assembly, probably by someone who didn't understand that these new composite materials have different stress tolerances than the old titanium. When you over-torque composite housings, they don't strip, they compress. And when they compress, they create a microscopic misalignment in anything they're connected to. The combustion chamber, Evelyn breathed. Exactly. It's sitting 0.3 degrees off-center. Not enough to show up on your digital diagnostics, but enough that when the engine fires under full power, the turbine is going to wobble. That wobble creates uneven pressure on the seals. The seals are going to fail. And when they fail at 12,000 feet. He made a small gesture, like something falling from the sky. Evelyn pulled out her tablet and started making notes. Can you fix it? I can. But it means partially disassembling the engine mount, reseating the combustion chamber, and replacing the damaged seals. It's about 4 hours of work if nothing goes wrong. Then we'd better get started. What followed was a masterclass in mechanical precision that Evelyn would remember for the rest of her life. Zeke worked with the quiet confidence of someone who had performed these operations hundreds of times, his hands moving through the complex disassembly with an economy of motion that came from pure muscle memory. He talked as he worked, his voice low and steady, explaining each step not like a teacher, but like someone sharing conversation with an old friend. This turbine shaft, see how it's got that blue tint? That's from heat stress. Someone ran this engine too hot during testing. Probably pushed it past redline to impress the brass. He carefully loosened a series of bolts in a specific pattern. You never remove engine bolts in sequence. You do it in a star pattern, equal pressure, or you'll warp the housing. Evelyn held the light steady, watching his every move. Where did you learn all this? Started in a garage in Mississippi when I was 14, Zeke said, his hands never pausing. My uncle had a crop duster, old beat-up thing that spent more time broken than flying. He taught me that engines are just conversations between metal parts. You learn to listen to what they're saying, and you'll always know what they need. He removed the combustion chamber housing, revealing the intricate array of components inside. Even at Evelyn's trained eye, everything looked perfect, but Zeke immediately pointed to a seal that looked identical to all the others. See that? The pressure ring is already starting to deform. Another few hours of operation, and it would have catastrophically failed. He reached into a spare parts bin that maintenance had left nearby and selected a replacement seal. This is going to save someone's life tonight, and they'll never even know it. The work continued. Zeke realigned the combustion chamber using nothing but a precision level and his own judgment, making microscopic adjustments until he was satisfied. Then he began the careful process of reassembly, each bolt torqued to exact specifications that he seemed to know by heart. How do you remember all the torque settings? Evelyn asked. Same way you remember your phone number, Zeke said with a slight smile. Some things just stick. They didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Kyle Benton stood in the shadows near the hangar entrance, his phone raised, the camera recording everything. Behind him, two other engineers from the day's shift stood frozen, having returned to retrieve forgotten equipment and stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. Well, Kyle said, his voice carrying across the empty space. The janitor and the doctor playing mechanic after hours. This ought to be interesting. Evelyn spun around, her heart dropping into her stomach. Kyle, this isn't what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you brought an unauthorized civilian into a restricted area to tamper with a multi-billion-dollar prototype. Kyle stepped forward, his earlier fear from the day's explosion apparently forgotten, replaced by the familiar swagger of someone who had just found leverage. I've got about 3 minutes of footage here. Pretty clear footage, too. Zeke carefully set down his tools and straightened up, his face calm. Son, you don't want to do this. Don't I? Kyle's smile was cold. You made me look like a fool today, old man. Pull me away from that engine like I was some kind of incompetent rookie. Now, I find you here, actually sabotaging the aircraft? Oh, this is going to make my career. He's not sabotaging anything, Evelyn said, her voice sharp. He's fixing the problems you couldn't see. The problems that almost killed you. That's not how the colonel's going to see it. Kyle gestured to the other two engineers. Go get security. Tell them we have an intruder tampering with the Ares Falcon. One of the engineers hesitated. Kyle, maybe we should just... Now, Kyle snapped. The engineer took off running. The second one lingered, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to openly defy Kyle. Zeke looked at Evelyn. You should go. Get out of here before this gets worse. I'm not leaving you, she said firmly. Dr. Moore, you have a career, a future. Don't throw it away because of me. Before she could respond, Colonel Payne burst through the hangar entrance, flanked by 4 security personnel. His face was purple with rage, his jaw clenched so tightly Evelyn could see the muscles jumping. Arrest him, Payne said, pointing at Zeke. Trespassing, tampering with classified military property, industrial sabotage. Sir, he wasn't sabotaging anything. Evelyn stepped forward. He was repairing critical flaws in the engine assembly. Flaws that your team missed. Flaws that could have resulted in. Dr. Moore, you are relieved of duty effective immediately, Payne said, his voice like ice. You will submit to questioning regarding your role in this security breach. As for you, he turned to Zeke. I don't know what your game is, but you just committed a federal crime. Two security officers moved forward with zip tie restraints. Zeke didn't resist. He simply held out his hands, his face expressionless as they bound his wrists. Colonel, you're making a mistake, Zeke said quietly. That jet still needs. I don't want to hear another word from you. Payne interrupted. You have no authority here. No credentials. No right to touch that aircraft. Actually, sir, one of the security officers said hesitantly, looking at a tablet. His file shows he has. I don't care what his file shows. Payne roared. Get him out of my sight. As they led Zeke toward the exit, he called back over his shoulder. Colonel, listen to me. Before you run tomorrow's test, you need to check the oxygen regulation system. There's a code buried in the override sequence. If you don't clear it, the pilot won't be able to. Remove him, Payne shouted. The security officers hustled Zeke out of the hangar. Evelyn tried to follow, but another guard blocked her path. Ma'am, you need to come with us for debriefing. She looked back at the Ares Falcon at the open engine panel where Zeke had been working. The combustion chamber was realigned. The new seals were installed. The work was nearly complete, but nearly wasn't enough. Kyle stood beside the colonel, showing him the phone footage. Sir, you could see clearly that he was inside the engine housing. Who knows what he could have done to compromise the systems? Payne watched the video, his expression growing darker. Run a full diagnostic sweep. I want every system checked and double-checked. If he changed even one line of code, I want to know about it. And the demonstration tomorrow? Kyle asked. Payne's jaw tightened. It goes forward as scheduled. We've already delayed too much. The investors are expecting a show, and that's what they're going to get. But sir, what if he actually did damage? Then we'll find in the diagnostics, Payne snapped. But I'm not going to let a homeless con artist destroy this program with paranoid conspiracy theories. He turned to leave, then paused. And Kyle, good work tonight. You may have just saved this entire project. Kyle smiled, the vindication sweet on his face. Thank you, sir. Just doing my duty. After they left, the second engineer who had been standing silent finally spoke. He wasn't sabotaging it, was he? Kyle's smile faded slightly. Doesn't matter what he was doing. What matters is who had authorization to do it. But you saw how he worked. The precision. That's not sabotage, Kyle. That's expertise. Then he should have gone through proper channels. Kyle pocketed his phone. Come on, let's get out of here before they decide we're accomplices. They left the hangar empty except for the Ares Falcon, sitting in its pool of shadow, its engines still partially disassembled, the work incomplete. And somewhere in a security holding cell, Zeke sat with his hands still bound, his head back against the concrete wall, his eyes closed. He had tried. He had given them the warning. Whether they listened was no longer in his control. But one thought kept circling through his mind as he waited for whatever came next. Tomorrow, that jet was going to fly. And when it did, all he could do was pray that what he had managed to fix would be enough to keep the pilot alive when the systems he hadn't reached began to fail. The night stretched on. Morning would come too soon, bringing with it cameras and crowds and a demonstration that might end in triumph or tragedy. Zeke had done everything he could. Now all that remained was to see if it would be enough. The night in the security outpost had been Zeke's partial repair of the combustion chamber and his warning about the oxygen system still echoing in his mind. Morning arrived with the harsh fluorescent lights flickering on and the distant sound of vehicles arriving for the demonstration. Through the small window of the holding room, he could see the sun climbing over the desert horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that reminded him of better days. By 9 a.m, the airbase was transformed into a spectacle of American military might and corporate ambition. Black sedans lined the VIP parking area. News crews positioned their cameras along the viewing platform. Men in expensive suits clustered around buffet tables while military brass moved among them with practiced diplomacy. The energy was electric, anticipatory, the kind of atmosphere that preceded either triumph or disaster. Inside the command center, banks of monitors displayed every angle of the Ares Falcon as it sat on the runway, fueled and ready. Evelyn stood near the back of the room, officially present but effectively sidelined. She had spent the last hour being questioned by base security about her role in bringing Zeke into the hangar. Her credentials hadn't been revoked yet, but the threat hung over her like a blade. Colonel Payne stood at the center of it all, resplendent in his dress uniform, his chest heavy with metals that caught the light every time he moved. He spoke into a headset, coordinating final checks with the control tower, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who believed everything was under control. All systems green, the chief technician reported from his console. Diagnostics completed at 0700. No anomalies detected. Outstanding, Payne said, then switched his headset to the public address channel. Ladies and gentlemen, we are 10 minutes from demonstration launch. Please move to designated viewing areas. The crowd outside shifted, moving toward the reinforced observation platform that offered an unobstructed view of the runway. Investors checked their watches. Reporters adjusted their microphones. The test pilot, Captain Marcus Shaw, a 34-year-old veteran with over 2,000 flight hours, climbed into the cockpit and began his pre-flight checklist. In the security outpost, Zeke stood with his face pressed to the window, watching the distant figure of the pilot settling into the aircraft. His hands gripped the windowsill tightly enough that his knuckles went white. "They're really going to do it," he said to the guard stationed inside the room with him, a young man named Peters who looked barely old enough to shave. "They're going to fly that bird with a buried code in the oxygen system." Peters shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I'm not supposed to engage in conversation with detainees. I'm not asking you to let me go," Zeke said, his voice strained but controlled. "I'm just asking you to make a phone call. Get someone to delay the launch. Just 30 minutes. That's all I need to explain what's wrong." "I can't do that, sir. I have my orders." Zeke turned from the window, his face etched with frustration and growing dread. "Son, that pilot is about to take off in an aircraft with a compromised system. I fixed what I could, but there's still a safety override buried in the code that's going to lock him out of manual controls. If he gets into trouble up there—" "With respect, sir," Peters interrupted, clearly reciting something he had been told, "you're not certified to make those kinds of assessments. The engineering team has cleared the aircraft for flight." Zeke wanted to argue, wanted to make the young guard understand the difference between what a computer diagnostic could see and what experience and instinct could sense. But he could see in Peters' eyes that it wouldn't matter. The guard was following orders. That was all he knew how to do. So Zeke turned back to the window and watched, helpless, as the demonstration he had tried to prevent moved forward with mechanical inevitability. At the command center, Captain Shaw's voice crackled over the radio. "Tower, this is Falcon 1. Pre-flight complete. All systems nominal. Ready for takeoff clearance. Falcon 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds light and variable. Ceiling unlimited. Good hunting, Captain." "Roger that, Tower." Falcon 1 rolling. The Ares Falcon's engines ignited with a roar that could be felt in the chest, even from a mile away. Twin plumes of superheated air shimmered behind the aircraft as it began moving down the runway, slowly at first, then with gathering speed. The crowd watched in hushed reverence as billions of dollars in technology and engineering accelerated toward liftoff. The nose lifted. The landing gear left the tarmac. The Ares Falcon climbed into the morning sky with the grace of something born to fly, its sleek profile cutting through the air like a knife through silk. In the command center, scattered applause broke out. Colonel Payne allowed himself a tight smile of satisfaction. The investors nodded to each other, making notes on tablets and phones. "Beautiful," one of them said. "Absolutely beautiful." The jet climbed rapidly, its engines singing the pure note of perfect combustion. At 5,000 feet, Captain Shaw banked into a wide turn, beginning the demonstration routine that would showcase the aircraft's maneuverability and speed. "Tower, initiating high-G turn sequence," Shaw reported. All systems performing as expected. Evelyn watched the monitor showing the telemetry data streaming from the aircraft. Everything looked perfect. Engine temperatures normal. Fuel flow optimal. Hydraulic pressure steady. She wanted to feel relief. Wanted to believe that maybe Zeke had been wrong. that his warnings had been the paranoid fears of a traumatized veteran seeing ghosts in every shadow. But something in her gut wouldn't settle. The Ares Falcon climbed through 8,000 feet, then 10,000, approaching the altitude where the real performance tests would begin. Captain Shaw's breathing was steady over the radio, the calm rhythm of a professional doing what he loved. At 11,000 feet, Evelyn noticed the first anomaly. A flicker in the oxygen regulation system readout. Just a momentary spike, barely noticeable among the flood of data crossing the screens. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. Did anyone else see that? The technicians were focused on the primary flight systems. Nobody responded. The Ares Falcon reached 12,000 feet. Captain Shaw's voice came over the radio, still professional, but with an edge of confusion. "Tower, I'm showing some unusual resistance in the control stick. It's subtle, but it's there." Colonel Payne leaned toward the communications console. "Falcon 1, can you describe the resistance? Is it affecting your ability to maneuver?" "Negative, Tower. It's manageable. Probably just the new flight control algorithms adjusting to..." Shaw's voice cut off for a second, then returned, sharper now. "Tower, I'm getting an error message. Something about oxygen flow regulation." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She grabbed the nearest technician's shoulder. "Check the oxygen system. Now." "It's reading normal," the technician said, scrolling through screens. "All parameters within acceptable range." "Check the override codes," Evelyn insisted. "Look for buried commands in the safety protocol subroutines." The technician gave her an irritated look, but started typing. His expression changed as new data appeared on a screen. "Wait, there's something here. An override command that's not in the standard configuration. It looks like it was installed weeks ago, but it's been dormant until..." The radio exploded with activity. Captain Shaw's voice, no longer calm, filled the command center. "Tower, I got a problem. Right thruster is sputtering. I'm losing power on the starboard engine." The crowd outside gasped as the Ares Falcon's smooth flight path wavered. Even from the ground, they could see the aircraft beginning to list to one side, smoke trailing from the right engine. "Shaw, execute emergency stabilization protocol." Payne barked into the radio. "Switch to manual override and compensate with left engine thrust." "I'm trying, Tower. The controls aren't responding. The system is rejecting my commands." The strain was evident in Shaw's voice now, the edge of real fear creeping in. "It says access denied." "Access denied? What the hell does that mean?" Evelyn spun toward Colonel Payne. "It's the override code. You authorized modifications to bypass federal safety regulations, didn't you? Those modifications locked out the manual controls as a failsafe to prevent unauthorized access." Payne's face went white. "That's classified information, Dr. Moore. Classified or not, it's going to kill that pilot." She grabbed the radio microphone. "Captain Shaw, this is Dr. Moore. The system has locked you out because of a buried safety protocol. You need to switch power from the auxiliary line and reroute to emergency oxygen line B12. That should reset the manual control authorization." "How do you know that?" Payne demanded, trying to take the microphone back. "Because Zeke Harris told me before you arrested him." She held onto the microphone, her voice rising. "The same man you threw in a cell for trying to fix this exact problem." In the security outpost, Zeke heard Shaw's panicked voice over the guard's radio and felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "Let me out," he said, his voice tight. "I can talk him through this. I know what's wrong." Peters shook his head, his own face pale with growing realization. "I can't. I don't have authorization." "Then get someone who does." Zeke shouted, abandoning all pretense of calm. "That pilot has maybe 2 minutes before the engine failure cascades into complete systems shutdown." In the command center, alarms were screaming from multiple consoles. The Ares Falcon was losing altitude, dropping from 12,000 feet toward 11,000 in a barely controlled descent. Shaw's breathing over the radio was rapid now, the ragged sound of someone fighting panic and losing. "Tower, I'm trying the emergency oxygen line like you said, but I don't know how to access it. My instrument panel is showing system errors across the board." Evelyn looked desperately around the command center. Someone has to know how to walk him through the manual bypass. The technicians exchanged helpless glances. These were software engineers, diagnostics experts, people who had been trained on computer systems and simulation programs. The kind of hands-on mechanical knowledge needed to jury-rig a fixed mid-flight was beyond their expertise. Kyle Benton stood near the back of the room, his phone still in his hand, his face ashen. He had wanted vindication, had wanted to prove that Zeke was a fraud. But watching a man die because he had prevented the only person who could help was a price he hadn't bargained for. "The janitor knew," he said, his voice barely audible. "Harris." He knew exactly what was wrong. Colonel Payne heard him. For one terrible moment, their eyes met, and the weight of what Payne had done crashed down on him with the force of the falling aircraft. "Get him," Payne said hoarsely. "Get Harris." Now, Evelyn was already running, her heels clicking on the tile floor as she sprinted toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Payne on the radio, his voice stripped of all its earlier confidence. "Captain Shaw, hold on. Help is coming. Just hold on." Evelyn's words about fetching Zeke and the chaos in the command center still reverberated as she burst through the security outpost door. Peters jumped to his feet, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Release him," Evelyn shouted, breathless from her sprint across the base. "Colonel's orders. We need him at the command center immediately." Peters fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the holding room. Zeke was already standing, having heard the commotion, his face grim with understanding. "The pilot?" he asked as the door swung open. "Still in the air?" "Barely. The right engine is failing and the manual controls are locked." Evelyn grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. "Can you help him?" "I can try." Zeke's voice was steady despite the urgency. "How much altitude does he have?" "He was at 11,000 last I saw." Topping fussed. They ran together across the tarmac, the morning sun beating down mercilessly. In the distance, Zeke could see the Ares Falcon struggling to maintain level flight. One engine trailing dark smoke, the aircraft's movements jerky and uncoordinated. They burst into the command center to find organized chaos. Every technician was shouting suggestions. Colonel Payne stood frozen at the communications console, the radio microphone hanging limply in his hand. Captain Shaw's labored breathing filled the room, punctuated by warning alarms from the aircraft's failing systems. Zeke didn't ask permission. He strode directly to the communication station, took the microphone from Payne's unresisting hand, and pressed the transmit button. "Captain Shaw, this is Ezekiel Harris. I'm a civilian contractor with Air Force mechanical experience. Can you hear me?" There was a moment of static-filled silence. Then Shaw's voice came back, strained but focused. "I hear you. Who did you say you were?" "My name is Ezekiel Harris. I worked on aircraft like the one you're flying. Your father might have mentioned me. I served with a pilot named Raymond Shaw in Kuwait, 91. Another pause. When Shaw spoke again, his voice carried a different tone. Disbelief mixed with something like hope. "You that Harris? My father told me about you. Said you saved his aircraft when the entire wing was shot to hell." "Your father was a good man and a better pilot," Zeke said, his voice calm and authoritative in a way that cut through the panic. "Right now, I need you to be just as good. Can you tell me what your instrument panel is showing?" "Multiple system failures. The right engine is at 30% power and dropping. I've got error messages saying manual override is disabled. The stick is sluggish and I'm losing altitude, currently at 9,500 feet and descending." Zeke closed his eyes, visualizing the aircraft's systems in his mind. "All right, listen carefully. The computer thinks you're not authorized to take manual control because someone modified the safety protocols. We need to convince it you're legitimate. On your left side panel, there's a red toggle switch marked Emergency Authority Override. Do you see it?" "I see it." "Flip that switch up, then immediately input command code Alpha 7 Tango 9 into your primary flight computer. That's going to bypass the electronic lockout and give you direct access to the hydraulic controls." Shaw's breathing was audible as he worked. "Switches up. Inputting code. Alpha 7 Tango 9. Nothing's happening. Give it 3 seconds." The system has to verify against the backup authorization database. The command center held its collective breath. 3 seconds stretched into an eternity. I've got control. Shaw's voice cracked with relief. The stick is responding. I can feel the hydraulics engaging. A cheer started to rise from the technicians, but Zeke held up his hand sharply, silencing them. You're not out of this yet, Captain. That right engine is going to quit completely in the next 60 seconds. When it does, the aircraft is going to want to spin on you. You need to prepare for a single-engine flight. Reduce your throttle on the left engine to 70%. You're going to lose more altitude, but we need to prevent asymmetric thrust from putting you into an uncontrolled roll. Reducing to 70%. Shaw's voice was steadier now, the professional pilot reasserting control over the panicked human. Engine failure is imminent. I can hear it dying. When it fails, immediately apply left rudder to compensate for the yaw. Don't overcorrect. Gentle pressure. The Ares has a tendency to overreact to rudder input. How do you know that? This is a prototype. Nobody should know its flight characteristics yet. Zeke allowed himself a small smile. Son, I helped design the hydraulic system. I know exactly how she's going to behave. The right engine gave a final sputter and went silent. The Ares Falcon immediately began to drift right as the thrust differential tried to spin the aircraft. On the monitors, everyone could see the jet's nose swinging off course. Left rudder, Zeke called. Smooth and steady. I've got it, Shaw grunted. She's fighting me, but I've got it. The aircraft stabilized, flying now on a single engine, losing altitude but maintaining controlled flight. The crowd outside, which had been watching in horrified silence, began to murmur as they realized the crisis might be survivable. All right, Zeke continued, his voice never wavering. You're at 8,500 feet. The runway is 12 miles northeast of your current position. You're going to need every foot of altitude to make it back. Begin a slow, wide turn toward the base. Keep your airspeed above 200 knots or you'll stall. Beginning turn. Airspeed 210 and steady. For the next 8 minutes, Zeke talked Captain Shaw through the most difficult flying of his career. Every adjustment to the throttle, every correction to the flight path, every preparation for a single-engine landing was guided by a man who understood the aircraft better than the people who had built it. The Ares Falcon limped back toward the airbase, trailing smoke, flying on borrowed time and borrowed altitude. The crowd had gone completely silent, watching the wounded aircraft make its final approach. Runway in sight, Shaw reported. Altitude 3,000 feet. I'm going to be coming in hot. That's fine, Zeke said. The arresting cables can handle it. But listen carefully. When you touch down, you're going to experience asymmetric braking. The computer is going to try to compensate, but it's going to overcompensate. As soon as your wheels hit, I need you to manually engage the left brake at 60% while keeping the right brake at 40%. Otherwise, you're going to ground loop and cartwheel this bird right off the runway. Understood. Left at 60, right at 40. The Ares Falcon crossed the runway threshold. Shaw brought it down with the precision of a surgeon, the wheels kissing the tarmac with barely a bounce. The instant the landing gear took the weight, Zeke watched the monitors showing the brake pressure. Shaw executed the asymmetric braking perfectly. The aircraft slowed in a straight line. The arresting cable caught the tail hook, and the Ares Falcon came to a complete stop 3/4 of the way down the runway. The command center erupted in cheers. Outside, the crowd applauded and shouted. Emergency vehicles raced toward the stopped aircraft, but Shaw was already climbing out of the cockpit, standing on the wing, raising his hand to signal he was uninjured. Evelyn grabbed Zeke in a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. You did it. You saved him. Zeke nodded, his own eyes wet, but his expression was somber. Someone shouldn't have had to be saved in the first place. He turned to look at Colonel Payne, who stood against the far wall, his face gray, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The room gradually quieted as people realized the crisis was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. Carl Benton stood near the door, his phone still in his hand, the recording he had made the night before suddenly feeling like a lead weight. One of the investors, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, approached Payne with cold fury in his eyes. "Colonel, my company has sunk $200 million into this project. I just watched our prototype nearly crash because of what sounds like gross negligence. I want answers. Now." Payne opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Zeke, at Evelyn, at the monitors still showing the crippled aircraft on the runway, and seemed to shrink inside his uniform. "Give me a full debrief in 1 hour," the investor continued. "And someone find out who that civilian is and why he knew more about this aircraft than your entire engineering staff." Payne finally found his voice, thin and desperate. "Gentlemen, please understand that this was an unforeseen malfunction. These things happen with experimental aircraft. The important thing is that our pilot is safe, and the important thing," another investor interrupted, "is that your aircraft nearly killed a man on its maiden demonstration flight. That doesn't inspire confidence, Colonel." As the investors moved away to confer in angry whispers, Payne turned to his security chief. "I want Harris escorted off this base immediately. And Dr. Moore is suspended pending full investigation into her unauthorized activities last night." But before the security chief could respond, a voice cut across the command center. "Belay that order." Everyone turned to see a man in a general's uniform entering the room. 2 stars gleamed on his shoulders. Behind him walked Captain Shaw, still in his flight suit, his face streaked with sweat but his eyes clear and focused. General Marcus Thornton was 62, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had earned his rank through combat, not politics. He surveyed the command center with a single sweeping glance that missed nothing. "I've been monitoring the situation from D.C., Thornton said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "And I've heard enough to know that what happened here today was not an unforeseen malfunction. It was a near disaster caused by bypassing federal safety protocols and ignoring qualified warnings." His eyes locked onto Payne. "Colonel, you're confined to quarters pending court-martial proceedings." Payne's face went from gray to white. "Sir, I can explain." "You'll have your chance to explain at your hearing." Thornton turned to Shaw. "Captain, I believe you have something to say." Shaw stepped forward, walking directly to Zeke. The command center fell silent. Then the pilot snapped to attention and rendered a crisp salute. "Sir," Shaw said, his voice thick with emotion, "my father told me stories about you my entire life. He said you were the best aircraft mechanic in the Air Force. Said you saved his life during Desert Storm. He also said the military did you wrong when they forced you out." Shaw's salute held steady. "Today, you saved my life. I won't forget that, and I'll make damn sure nobody else forgets it either." Zeke returned the salute slowly, his hand trembling slightly. "Your father was a good man, Captain. I'm glad I could honor his memory by bringing his son home." Shaw dropped his salute, but extended his hand. Zeke shook it, and for a moment, the 2 men stood connected by more than just the crisis they had survived. They were connected by legacy, by service, by the unspoken bond between those who had faced death and found a way through. General Thornton stepped forward. "Mr. Harris, on behalf of the United States Air Force, I apologize for how you've been treated. Both yesterday and years ago. We failed you. That ends today." He turned to address the entire room. "I'm initiating a full investigation into this incident. Colonel Payne's modifications to the safety protocols, the dismissal of Mr. Harris's warnings, and Dr. Moore's reprimand for trying to prevent this disaster. All of it will be reviewed." Evelyn felt a wave of relief, so powerful she had to steady herself against the console. Kyle Benton had already slipped out of the room, his face pale, understanding that the footage on his phone had just become evidence of a crime rather than proof of sabotage. As the command center began to empty, the investors leaving to make angry phone calls and the technicians being dismissed for debriefing, Zeke found himself standing alone with Evelyn and Captain Shaw. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked. Zeke looked out the window at the Ares Falcon, still sitting on the runway, damaged but whole. "Now they figure out how to fix their mistakes. And I go back to whatever comes next." "You could stay," Shaw said. "Consult on the program. Make sure this never happens again." But Zeke shook his head. "I've done my part, Captain. The bird is on the ground. The pilot is safe. That's all I needed." He walked toward the door, his work boots scuffing on the floor, looking every bit the janitor he had been when this story started. But Evelyn saw something different in his posture now. The weight he had been carrying seemed lighter, the shadows in his eyes less dark. He had saved a life, had prevented a tragedy, had finally, after all these years, finished the mission he had started in a different desert, a different war, with a different set of impossible odds. As he reached the exit, he paused and looked back at the aircraft one more time. "I used to build these," he said softly, to himself and to no one. Then he was gone, disappearing into the morning sunlight, leaving behind a command center full of people who would never again underestimate the quiet wisdom of those society had forgotten. Zeke had guided Captain Shaw to safety and watched as General Thornton began dismantling Colonel Payne's authority piece by piece. The command center had emptied, the crisis had passed, and now he found himself walking the perimeter road that led away from the base, his small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. He had done what needed doing. The pilot was alive. The truth was coming out. There was nothing left for him here. But as he walked along the empty stretch of road that bordered the outskirts of the base, he noticed a black SUV parked in the distance, positioned where the access road met the highway. It sat there idling, windows tinted dark, exhaust shimmering in the heat. Zeke's instincts, honed by years of survival in hostile territory, sent up immediate warning signals. He slowed his pace, but kept walking, his eyes tracking the vehicle without appearing to stare directly at it. The SUV's doors opened. Two men stepped out, both wearing civilian clothes, but moving with the purposeful coordination of military contractors. They were younger, fitter, the kind of men who spent their days in gyms and their nights taking jobs that existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal. The taller one, a man with a shaved head and a scar running through his left eyebrow, called out, "Ezekiel Harris. We need to talk." Zeke stopped walking. He set his duffel bag down carefully on the dusty ground, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "I don't know you gentlemen, and I'm pretty sure we don't have anything to talk about." "Colonel Payne thinks differently," the second man said. He was shorter but broader, with the build of a linebacker and the flat, empty eyes of someone who had done violence so often it no longer registered as anything special. "You've got something that belongs to him. A flash drive that Dr. Moore gave you. We're here to retrieve it." Zeke's hand moved unconsciously to his jacket pocket, where the small drive containing Evelyn's evidence sat. She had given it to him last night before they entered the hangar, insurance in case things went wrong. He had forgotten about it in the chaos of the demonstration. "The colonel is in custody," Zeke said, his voice level. "Whatever he wants doesn't matter anymore. You boys should go home before you make this worse for yourselves." The taller man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We're not asking, old man. Hand over the drive, and we'll forget we ever saw you. Make this difficult, and things are going to get unpleasant." "For who?" Zeke asked quietly. The two men exchanged glances. Then they started walking toward him, their intentions clear in their body language. They expected easy compliance from a 58-year-old homeless veteran. They expected him to be afraid. They were about to learn how wrong expectations could be. The taller man reached for Zeke's jacket. It was a mistake he would regret. Zeke's hand snapped up, catching the man's wrist and twisting it sharply clockwise. The motion was economical, precise, the kind of defensive technique taught to military personnel who needed to disarm opponents quickly and efficiently. The man yelped in pain as his wrist bent at an unnatural angle, forcing him to his knees. The shorter man lunged forward, throwing a punch aimed at Zeke's head. But Zeke had already moved, releasing the first attacker and pivoting to the side. The punch sailed past his ear. He drove his elbow into the shorter man's solar plexus, a short, brutal strike that knocked the wind from his lungs and sent him stumbling backward, gasping. "I don't want to hurt you," Zeke said, breathing hard but still standing firm. "Walk away." The taller man climbed to his feet, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. He pulled a collapsible baton from his belt and extended it with a sharp metallic click. "You're going to regret that, old man." He swung the baton in a wide arc. Zeke ducked under it, feeling the weapon whistle past overhead. He stepped inside the man's reach and delivered a palm strike to the chin that snapped the attacker's head back. The baton clattered to the ground. The shorter man had recovered his breath and came at Zeke from behind, wrapping thick arms around his chest in a crushing bear hug. Zeke felt his ribs compress, his lungs struggling for air. He was strong, but he was also 58 years old, and these men were professional fighters. He stomped down hard on the man's instep, feeling bones crunch beneath his heel. The grip loosened. Zeke drove his head backward, connecting with the man's nose in a spray of blood. The arms released him completely. Zeke spun free, but his age was showing now. His breathing was labored. His shoulder ached where it had hit the ground earlier. The taller man was back on his feet, and both attackers were circling him with renewed caution and increased anger. "Last chance," Zeke said, his voice ragged. "Walk away. You're dead, old man." The taller one spat, blood running from his split lip. They came at him together this time, coordinated, one high and one low. Zeke managed to deflect the high attack, but the low one connected, a solid punch to his ribs that sent pain lancing through his side. He staggered, his vision blurring for a moment. Another blow caught him across the shoulder, then another to his stomach. He was going down. He knew it, but he wasn't going down easy. He grabbed the taller man's jacket and pulled him off balance, sending both of them crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. They rolled in the dust, trading blows that were more about desperation than technique now. Zeke felt something pop in his shoulder, felt warm blood running from a cut above his eye. But his hand found the dropped baton, and he swung it with everything he had left. The impact connected with the taller man's temple. The attacker went limp, unconscious before he hit the ground. The shorter man backed away, his broken nose streaming blood, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. "This isn't over," he said, but the conviction had left his voice. "Yeah, it is," Zeke said, climbing painfully to his feet. "Tell Payne he already lost. This just proves it." The shorter man dragged his unconscious partner back to the SUV, loaded him into the passenger seat, and drove away, tires kicking up dust as the vehicle accelerated toward the highway. Zeke stood alone on the empty road, swaying slightly, his body a map of fresh bruises and old scars. He picked up his duffel bag with his good arm and continued walking, though each step sent new waves of pain through his battered frame. He made it another half-mile before his legs simply stopped working. He sank down beside an old concrete outpost that had been abandoned years ago, part of the base's original perimeter. The sun was lower now, the shadows growing long. His phone had one bar signal. He pulled it out with trembling hands and dialed Evelyn's number. She answered on the second ring. "Zeke, where are you? The general wants to speak with you about." "I need help," he said simply, and heard her sharp intake of breath. "Where are you?" "Old Perimeter Road, about 2 miles south of the main gate, near the abandoned checkpoint." "I'm coming. Stay there. Don't move." "Wasn't planning on it," he said, and the phone slipped from his fingers. Evelyn found him 20 minutes later, her car skidding to a stop on the gravel shoulder. She ran to him, her professional composure cracking when she saw the blood and bruises. "What happened?" "Payne sent some contractors. They wanted the flash drive." He managed a weak smile. "They didn't get it. You're bleeding. We need to get you to the base hospital." "No hospitals. Can't afford it. Just help me to your car. I'll be fine." "You're not fine, Zeke. You can barely sit up. I've had worse." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist, but she could see the stubborn set of his jaw and knew it would be pointless. Instead, she helped him to his feet, taking most of his weight on her shoulders, and guided him to her vehicle. As they drove back toward the base, her hands tight on the steering wheel, she said, "You shouldn't have had to fight for doing the right thing. You shouldn't have to fight this hard just to be heard. Some engines need more than oil to run again," Zeke said, his head leaning against the window. "Sometimes they need someone willing to get their hands dirty fixing them." By the time they reached the base, news of the attack had already spread. General Thornton himself was waiting at the gate, flanked by military police. When he saw Zeke's condition, his face darkened with controlled fury. "Mr. Harris, who did this to you?" Two contractors said they were working for Colonel Payne. Wanted evidence Dr. Moore had collected. Did they get it? Zeke pulled the flash drive from his pocket and held it up. No, sir. They did not. Thornton took the drive carefully, like it was evidence at a crime scene, which technically it now was. Assault on a civilian contractor on federal property. Conspiracy to destroy evidence. Payne just added a few more years to his prison sentence. He gestured to the military police. Get Mr. Harris medical attention and find those contractors. I want them in custody within the hour. As medics helped Zeke from the car, Thornton called after him. Mr. Harris, tomorrow morning there's going to be a debriefing with the investigative board. I'd like you to be there. Will you come? Zeke looked back at the general, this man who represented everything the military had once been to him before it became something broken and bureaucratic. Yes, sir. I'll be there. Good man. Thornton's expression softened slightly. And Mr. Harris? Thank you. For Shaw. For the truth. For all of it. Zeke nodded, too tired for words, and let the medics lead him away. The next morning arrived cold and clear, the desert air sharp enough to sting. The debriefing room was packed with military brass, civilian oversight officials, representatives from the defense contractors, and a handful of carefully selected press members. At the front of the room, a large screen displayed the Ares Falcon Project logo. Zeke entered wearing clean clothes that Evelyn had brought him, his cuts bandaged, his arm in a sling. The room fell silent as he walked to his designated seat. Beside him sat Evelyn. Behind them, Captain Shaw in his dress uniform. Kyle Benton sat near the back, his earlier swagger completely absent, replaced by the hunched posture of someone waiting for judgment. General Thornton stood at the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention. This debriefing concerns the events of yesterday's demonstration and the circumstances leading to the near-catastrophic failure of the Ares Falcon prototype. What we've discovered in the last 24 hours represents a failure of leadership, protocol, and basic human decency. He pressed a button and the screen changed, showing technical data from the aircraft's black box. The engine failure was caused by a combination of factors: a misaligned combustion chamber, compromised seals, and a buried override code that locked the pilot out of manual controls. All of these issues were identified and reported by one man. He gestured towards Zeke. Staff Sergeant Ezekiel Harris, retired. The screen changed again, showing Zeke's military record, his commendations, his years of service, the sealed operation that had ended his career. Sergeant Harris tried to warn us. Multiple times. He was ignored, mocked, and ultimately arrested for attempting to prevent the very disaster we witnessed. Thornton's voice was hard as granite. Meanwhile, Colonel Payne had been falsifying safety data for months, pushing unauthorized modifications, and prioritizing corporate interests over pilot safety. He looked directly at the press representatives. Yesterday, Sergeant Harris saved Captain Shaw's life using knowledge and expertise that this institution once valued highly before choosing to discard him. That ends today. Thornton pressed another button. Video footage filled the screen, Kyle's recording from the night in the hangar. But instead of showing sabotage, it clearly displayed Zeke working with precision and care, repairing the damaged systems while explaining every step to Evelyn. This footage was taken by senior technician Kyle Benton with the intent to incriminate Sergeant Harris. Instead, it proves his competence and the negligence of those who should have listened to him. Thornton's gaze found Kyle in the back of the room. Mr. Benton, stand up. Kyle rose shakily to his feet, his face pale. You have two choices, Thornton said. You can face charges for evidence tampering and filing false reports. Or you can tell this board the truth about what you witnessed and help ensure nothing like this happens again. Which is it? Kyle's voice was barely audible. I'll tell the truth, sir. Good. Sit down. Thornton turned back to the rest of the room. Colonel Payne is in custody facing court-martial on multiple charges. The contractors he hired to assault Sergeant Harris have been arrested. And as of this morning, I'm implementing new protocols that require all technical concerns raised by qualified personnel, regardless of current employment status, to be formally reviewed before any demonstration flights. He stepped away from the podium and walked directly to Zeke. The entire room watched as the general came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. Staff Sergeant Harris, on behalf of the United States Air Force and the men and women who serve in it, I apologize. We failed you twice. Once when we forced you into silence years ago, and again when we refused to hear you last week. You deserve better then. You deserve better now. Zeke stood slowly, his injured shoulder protesting, and returned the salute. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the silent room. Sir, I didn't do this for apologies or recognition. I did it because a pilot's life was at stake, and I had the knowledge to help. That's all it ever needed to be. That may be all it needed to be for you, Sergeant, Thornton replied. But for us, it needs to be more. It needs to be a reminder that expertise and honor don't disappear just because someone falls on hard times. That we have an obligation to the people who served us, even after their service has officially ended. He lowered his salute and extended his hand. Zeke shook it, and the room erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory applause, but genuine appreciation from people who understood they had witnessed something important. Captain Shaw stood and added his applause. Then Evelyn. Then, slowly, even Kyle Benton rose to his feet, clapping with tears running down his face. 3 weeks had passed since the debriefing. The military investigation had concluded with Colonel Payne facing a court-martial that would likely result in prison time. The 2 contractors had taken plea deals. The Ares Falcon program had been restructured with new leadership and stricter oversight protocols. And Ezekiel Harris found himself standing in a conference room at the Pentagon, wearing a suit that Evelyn had insisted on buying for him, facing a panel of generals and defense officials who wanted to offer him a formal position. Mr. Harris, the lead official said, shuffling papers on the polished table, we'd like to offer you reinstatement as a senior consultant for mechanical safety and aircraft systems. The position comes with full back pay for the years since your discharge, comprehensive benefits, and a salary commensurate with your expertise. Zeke stood quietly for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside the window, he could see the Washington Monument rising against a gray sky. With respect, sir, I decline. The officials exchanged surprised glances. May I ask why? This is a significant opportunity. Because I don't need a title to validate what I know, Zeke said simply. And I don't need a salary to make what I did worthwhile. I appreciate the offer, truly. But what happened at that airbase wasn't about getting my job back. It was about making sure a pilot went home to his family. The lead official leaned back in his chair. Then what do you need, Mr. Harris? What would make things right? Zeke considered the question carefully. I need the military to honor the people who served and then got forgotten. The ones living on streets, in shelters, in their cars. The ones with skills and knowledge who can't get anyone to listen because they don't have an address or a business card. That's what I need. A system that doesn't throw people away. That's a tall order. Yes, sir, it is. But if you want to make things right, that's where you start. Later that evening, Zeke stood in Arlington National Cemetery, his hand resting on a simple gravestone. The name carved into the marble read, Captain James Richmond, followed by dates and a brief inscription about service and sacrifice. We're good now, sir, Zeke said softly to the stone. I kept my promise. Save a pilot, just like you always told us to do. The kid's father was Raymond Shaw. You remember him? The one we pulled out of that burning Phantom in '91. His son flies the new birds now. Smart kid. Good instincts. The wind moved through the rows of white markers, carrying the scent of cut grass and distant rain. I fixed what I could, Zeke continued. Not just the jet. Other things, too. Things I didn't know were broken until I started looking at them. He paused, his throat tight. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. Sorry I couldn't save you and the others. But I'm not carrying that weight anymore. I did what I could with what I had, and that's going to have to be enough. He stood there for a while longer, saying goodbye to ghosts that had haunted him for too many years. Then he walked back through the cemetery gates to where Evelyn waited in her car. You okay? She asked as he climbed into the passenger seat. Yeah, he said, and meant it. I'm okay. 2 months after the incident, Evelyn stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the same Arizona Air Base, where everything had begun. The new facility gleamed in the desert sun, its sign reading Project Ares Honor, Veterans Engineering Initiative. The program was funded by a combination of military and private sector money, designed to identify and recruit veterans with technical expertise who had fallen through the cracks. It offered training, certification, housing assistance, and direct placement into aerospace engineering positions. Evelyn had designed it. The military had approved it. And the first class of 20 veterans, ranging in age from 25 to 68, stood in clean uniforms beside their workstations, ready to begin. "This program exists," Evelyn said into the microphone, addressing the assembled crowd of officials and press, because one man refused to stay silent when he saw something wrong. Because he valued a stranger's life more than his own comfort. Because he proved that expertise and honor don't disappear just because someone loses their way for a while. She gestured toward the back of the crowd, where Zeke stood in simple work clothes, uncomfortable with the attention. Staff Sergeant Ezekiel Harris reminded us that the people we forget are often the ones we need most. This program is built on that foundation. The applause was warm, genuine. Several of the new program participants, veterans themselves who had been living rough until a few weeks ago, looked at Zeke with understanding and gratitude. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded Evelyn, asking questions about the program and the dramatic events that had inspired it. But Zeke slipped away, walking toward the hangars where real work was being done. He found himself in Hangar B, the same space where he had swept floors and been invisible. Now, it housed training stations and equipment, veterans working on aircraft components under the guidance of experienced instructors. A young recruit, maybe 19 years old, struggled with a hydraulic assembly at one of the stations. He had the focused intensity of someone who wanted desperately to get it right, but couldn't quite figure out the sequence. Zeke watched for a moment, then approached quietly. "Mind if I show you something?" The recruit looked up, startled, then recognized him from the ceremony. "Sir, I'd be honored." "Not sir, just Zeke." He gently took the tool from the young man's hand and demonstrated the proper technique, his movements sure and economical. "The trick is to listen to what the parts are telling you. This seal here, you hear that little whisper when you apply pressure? That's the hydraulic fluid finding its path. You force it, and you'll tear the seal. You listen, and it guides you to the right position." The recruit tried again, following Zeke's guidance. This time, the assembly slid into place with a satisfying click. "I got it." The young man's face lit up with accomplishment. "You did," Zeke agreed. "Now do it 9 more times until your hands remember it without your brain having to think about it." As he moved to leave, the recruit called after him. "Mr. Harris? Thank you for all of this. My sergeant told me I had no future after I got discharged. Said my skills didn't translate to civilian life. You proved him wrong." Zeke smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Your sergeant didn't understand that skills don't disappear. They just wait for the right opportunity. Keep learning, keep listening, and you'll do fine." He walked out of the hangar into the bright Arizona afternoon. In the distance, he could see the Ares Falcon, fully repaired now, sitting on the tarmac in pristine condition. It would fly again soon, this time with proper testing and honest assessment of its capabilities. Captain Shaw's voice called out behind him. "Zeke, wait up." The pilot jogged over, still in his flight suit, his face animated. "I've been looking for you. The press want a photo with both of us for the ceremony coverage." "I'm not much for photos, Captain. It's Marcus. We're past the formalities now." Shaw's expression grew serious. "My father passed away 6 years ago. Liver cancer from exposure to chemical weapons during Desert Storm. The VA fought his benefits until the end. He died waiting for compensation he had earned." "I'm sorry," Zeke said quietly. "So am I. But you know what he told me before he died? He said the military would fail him, but the men he served with never did. He told me about how you stayed behind to fix his bird while everyone else evacuated. How you worked under enemy fire because you believed every pilot deserved to come home." Marcus's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You gave him 20 more years of life by saving him that day. 20 years with his family. With me. I just wanted you to know what that meant." Zeke's throat tightened. "Your father was worth saving. So were you." They stood together in comfortable silence, two men connected by legacy and chance, until Marcus said, "Come on, one photo. Then I'll buy you the worst coffee the base can offer, and we'll call it even." Worst coffee? Now that's an offer I can't refuse. The photograph they took that day would appear in newspapers across the country. It showed a test pilot in full uniform standing beside a man in simple work clothes, both of them smiling genuinely, their hands clasped in mutual respect. The caption read, "From the shadows to recognition, the veteran who saved the Ares Falcon." But Zeke never saw the newspapers. He was too busy working. 6 months later, he stood in a different hangar, watching a different aircraft being prepared for flight. This one was civilian, a cargo transport being refurbished for a small shipping company. The mechanics working on it were program graduates, veterans who had found their way back to purpose through the initiative Evelyn had created. One of them, a woman named Sarah Jenkins who had served in the Navy and ended up homeless after a messy divorce, called out to him, "Zeke, can you check my work on this fuel line routing? I think I have it right, but I'd feel better if you verified it." He walked over, examined her work with a critical eye, and nodded approvingly. "That's solid work, Sarah. Textbook perfect. Learn from the best," she said with a grin. As the day wore on and the work continued, Zeke found himself thinking about the long journey that had brought him here. From the battlefields of the Middle East to the streets of Phoenix. From being invisible to being seen. From carrying the weight of failure to understanding that doing your best was enough, even when the outcome wasn't perfect. He had lost people he cared about, had made mistakes that couldn't be unmade, but he had also saved lives, passed on knowledge, and helped build something that would outlast him. That evening, as the sun set over the desert in a blaze of orange and purple, Zeke stood outside the hangar watching the sky. The sound of jet engines rumbled in the distance, a sound that had been the soundtrack of his entire adult life. A young mechanic approached, maybe 25 years old, carrying tools and questions. "Mr. Harris? I'm having trouble understanding the sequence for the auxiliary power unit. The manual doesn't make sense to me." Zeke turned from the sunset and smiled. "Come on, I'll show you." They walked back into the hangar together, the older man and the younger, passing knowledge across the years the way it had always been passed, the way it would continue to be passed long after both of them were gone. And as Zeke began explaining the intricacies of aircraft systems to yet another eager student, he thought about how far he had come from that day, when recruits had laughed at him for claiming he used to build these machines. He had been invisible then, dismissed, forgotten. Now he was exactly where he needed to be. Not famous, not wealthy, just useful, just teaching, just building the next generation of people who would keep aircraft flying and pilots safe. The young mechanic listened intently as Zeke explained the sequence, his hands demonstrating each step. When the explanation finished and the young man successfully completed the procedure, his face lit up with understanding and accomplishment. "I got it," he said, wonder in his voice. "I actually got it." "You did," Zeke confirmed. "Now practice it until it becomes second nature. That's how you honor the knowledge, by making it yours and then passing it on." As the young mechanic returned to his station, energized and confident, Evelyn walked into the hangar carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had been promoted to director of the entire Veterans Engineering Program, and now spent her days building the infrastructure to help forgotten veterans find their way back to purpose. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him a cup. "Thanks." He took a sip, then smiled. "This is terrible coffee." "I know, but it's our terrible coffee." She gestured at the hangar, at the veterans working together, at the aircraft being brought back to life by skilled hands that had been idle for too long. "You built this, Zeke. Not just a program. This whole community of people who are finding their way back." "I just fixed what was broken," he said simply. "Same as always." "That's exactly what you did. And it matters. More than you know." They stood together watching the work continue, the sound of tools and voices filling the space where once there had only been silence and neglect. Outside, the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, constant and unchanging, bearing witness to all the small acts of courage and redemption that unfolded beneath them. Zeke set down his coffee and picked up his tools. There was still work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, That thought brought him peace instead of pain. He was exactly where he belonged, building, teaching, honoring the past by creating a better future. And if someone asked what he did, he would tell them the truth with quiet pride. I used to build these, and now I'm helping others learn to build them too. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. When was the last time you truly saw someone society had rendered invisible? And what wisdom might you have missed by looking past them? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of redemption, courage, and the quiet heroes hidden in plain sight.